What's going on YouTube? It's Andreas here from Symmetry 4-Wheel Drive and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video we are going to be putting a new set of wheels and tires on the E90 330D. Now the specs for these wheels and tires are a 18 by 9 inch plus 35 offset in a square setup, so that's the same wheel size on each corner of the car, not the standard staggered setup that comes on these cars from the factory. And the reason for that is the staggered setup is normally more biased towards understeer to be safe from the factory and the manufacturer, and we would like to have a more neutral or maybe leaning more towards an oversteer bias setup on the car. Now in terms of tires, we are likely going to go for a 255 35/18 at the front and a 265 35/18 at the rear. Now you might be wondering, why are we going with a square set of wheels and not a square set of tires? And the reason for that is to get as much rubber in the rear as possible in order to keep that high torque value that these 330Ds have in check. Now let's jump right into the fitment and what we are doing in this video, and we will see you at Tiger Wheel and Tire in Tokai, who are go-to people when it comes to wheels and tires. So let's dive right into that. So I've just done a test fit of the front wheel, and as I probably mentioned, the wheel setup is a 18 by 9 all around with a positive 25 offset. And sorry, 35 offset, not a positive 25, it's a 35. And I test fitted, and I'm lucky that I did, because at the strut at the front here there's only about 6.5 millimeters of space, and we are going to be running a 255 35/18 tire. So I'm going to have to use probably about a 4 millimeter spacer is what I'm going to go with, just to bring the wheel out a bit and basically make it a positive 31 offset, just to make sure that I have enough clearance with the tire against the strut there. So that's just for the front setup. The rears fit just perfectly, and I'm just going to run a 4 millimeter spacer all the way around the car, just to make the rear a bit more flush and also to make the front have enough clearance for the strut here. So that is the one difficulty you get with running wide tires and wide wheels at the front on your E90 BMW. So you just need to keep that in mind. If you want to run a 9-inch wheel, probably a 30 or 31 offset is what you'll need if you want to run a nice beefy tire setup. So yeah, I'm happy that I checked that, and I'm going to be ordering some 4 millimeter spacers soon. What I'm going to be doing now is weighing the new Koya SF15 wheels, and that's a 18 by 9 35 offset, and I'm going to weigh this so that I can see what sort of gains we are making in terms of weight reduction on the hubs in terms of unsprung mass. So I'm going to weigh this new Koya wheel, then I'm going to weigh the rear OEM wheel and tire, and then the front OEM wheel and tire with the OEM staggered setup, so I can get a bit of an idea. I'll also get the weight of the Continental tires that we are putting on this wheel, so that I can add them together and see what sort of gains we are making. So we are looking at about 9.5 kilograms for the 18-inch Koya semi-forged wheels. So that's quite a good weight for a 18-inch 9-inch wide wheel. So that's 9.5 of those. So I'm just going to grab, I'm actually going to do the front OEM setup first and just check what that weight is. So we have about 23 kilos with the OEM 17-inch wheel. That's a 17 by 8 with a 225/45/17 Continental Runflat on there. So that's about 23 kilos. For the rear, because the tires are split from the wheel, I'm going to weigh each separately and then add it together. So that is 13 kilos for the rear OEM 17 by 9.5, oh sorry, 17 by 8.5 wheel. So that's about 13 kilos for that, and that's an 8.5 inch wide, 17-inch diameter wheel. Now for the rear tire, we are looking at 11.5 for that rear 255/40/17 Runflat Continental tire. So in total that would be 24.5 kilos for the rear wheel and tire setup. So I'll just get the weight of that Continental tire that we are putting on these new Koyas, and then I'll add that together so you can see what sort of weight savings we gain with this new setup.
Oh, brother, yes, I love you.
Love you too. With this mentioned wheel and tire setup that we are going with on the 330D, the 255/35/18 tire in the front is quite a squeeze, so to speak, to fit in there, and that is one of the reasons we are going with that specific 35 offset on these wheels in a 9-inch wide setup. And this setup is a couple millimeters off what is recommended to run a 255/35. Normally you would want an offset of 30 to 31 max, but because I fell in love with this style of wheel and what this wheel offers in terms of being semi-forged, lightweight and very strong, I had to get it in the best offset that was offered, which is a 35 offset. And that means we will just have to run some spacers on the front and then to square the setup on the rear as well. So those will be 3 to 5 millimeter spacers, and we'll get more in depth on that specific fitment later on in this video. What I've been doing now on the 330D is just checking the clearance between the wheel and tire on the inside and where it sits just off of the strut, so the shock of the front of the suspension here. So I've just checked the gap that's in between the wheel and tire and the shock, and at ride height we're sitting at 8 millimeters of space between the shock and the wheel and tire, and that is with a temporary 5 millimeter spacer at the front here. So with that measurement, what I think I'm going to do is order a set of 3 millimeter spacers and fit those, and that should give me roughly about 6 millimeters of clearance between the shock and the wheel and tire at ride height. So that will vary and change as the wheel arcs through its suspension travel, but basically it should be around 6 millimeters throughout the suspension travel. Now what I'm also going to do is get a set of hub extenders, so that with that 3 millimeter spacer and the slight bevel on the inside edge of the wheel, the space that's left on the hub is roughly around 5 millimeters or so. So I just want to have some extra interface between the hub that centers and takes all the load of the wheel. It's actually not the lug bolts that hold the wheel together, it's the hub that the wheel is resting on. So I'm going to get some hub extenders that basically are just a press tight tolerance fit into the hub on the car, and that gives you about an extra 10 millimeters of interface between the wheel and the hub. Unfortunately, at the rear there isn't a hub extender available, but there should still be enough meat on that hub to hold the wheel properly and interface properly and have enough purchase on the wheel. So I think we're going to go with a 3mm spacer all the way around on the car. I'm going to look and see if there are any sort of interfaces or accessories that will give you some extra hub at the rear. To my knowledge at this point in time there isn't anything, but I'm gonna have a look and find out if I can see anything anyway. I'm also gonna have a look at the rear just to see if I can figure out anything to get a little bit of extra hub length just to interface with the wheel better. Looking at the rear hub on the E90 here, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to run a hub extender here as well as in the front. The only thing I can imagine is maybe because the hub tapers a bit inwards on the rear here, but other than that I think it should work, but I'm gonna check the front just to double check. But I don't see why you wouldn't be able to run a hub extender at the rear as well. Looking at the front of the E90 on the hub, I don't see why there would be any difference running a hub extender on the front and not the rear. Now this is just what I've been reading up on the internet and forums, is that you apparently can't run a hub extender in the rear, but from what I can see there really shouldn't be any difference or any issue running a hub extender in the rear versus running one in the front. So I'm going to do a bit more digging, a bit more research, but likely I'm going to go ahead and try fit hub extenders to the front and rear, and in that case for a better fitment in terms of not only function and clearance between the strut but actual look. I think a 5mm spacer with these wheels would actually be the perfect fitment in terms of look as well. Yes, it's not going to be absolutely flush, but I want it to be functional and look good, not look good and maybe a bit functional. So function is first priority, looking good is second. So if I can run hub extenders in the front and rear, I'll be going with a 5mm spacer and not a 3mm spacer as I mentioned before. So I'm just going to look a bit further into that and then see which one will end up being the best. I think now is as good a time as any to jump into the reveal of the wheel and tire setup on the car and show you all how it looks. But just before we do that, I just wanted to let you know that I'm running a temporary set of 5mm spacers all the way around on the car with extended lug bolts, and that's just a temporary solution while I still sort out that hub extender and roughly 3mm spacer setup. So I will keep you updated on the channel as soon as that's fitted on the car, but until then I couldn't wait to show you what it looks like. So let's check what it looks like. And just before that, I am really happy with the setup. The color with the Lamar blue on the 330D looks absolutely amazing. Those Koya SF15 semi-forged wheels really look great. It's also something a little bit different to your norm on a Euro style BMW like this. It's a bit more Japanese inspired in a way, like a Gram light kind of style wheel, and I think that's really different to in comparison to what you normally see on these cars. And I'm very happy with the tires. They are really grippy, a little bit on the noisy side, but the setup being 255s in the front and 265s in the rear, it really offers a lot of grip and the car feels poised and really dynamically pleasing. So I'm happy with the setup, and let's jump into the reveal and show you how the car is looking.